Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, folks. Thank you for joining me today. It is the 25th of February. This is the EMEA and America's time zone friendly customer success office hours call. As per usual, my name is Will Rodbard, and I typically host this call along with some of my colleagues who I'm hoping will be joining shortly. Currently, we have Gus and Amy online with us, and I'm hoping some of my other architect and customer success manager friends join in as well, so we can have a bit more of an active discussion. But as per usual, if you are not feeling brave enough to talk, please use the Q&A or the chat boxes from Zoom, or if you're watching via Twitch, please use the Twitch chat panel there as well. And again, if you're catching this recording via YouTube, please post any comments you like, good or bad, in the comment section. Give us a like. If there's anything you want us to cover, please post it there as well, and we'll do our best if it requires testing or labbing so we can demo it for you, or just if you have some questions, we can pick them up from there now as well. Okay, so this week we're going to carry on with where we were last week. So for those that didn't join us last week or are just picking up this recording today, we used to run some sessions within a different version of customer success called the Unvarnished Truth. Myself, my colleague, ex-CS colleague Matt Vanderbilt, he used to host this call. Aidan Dalgleish, we used to run these sessions when we did direct-to-customer and partner sessions, and we just found them to be well received. They give you a bit of a heads up as to why certain things work the way they work, or don't work the way you'd think they would work. So I thought I would run through. Now, last week, if you were on the call, you'll remember we covered a few things like storage, networking, sort of things about the transit gateway, scale and performance of networking. We dove into operations a bit, so monitoring, upgrades, and the like. And we got kind of halfway through migration and DR as a topic. And just as a bit of a recap, so DR, we were talking about using a couple of different products, so whether it be SRM or HCX to perform DR. And I just wanted to go into that in a bit more detail before we sort of move on, because I didn't really have time to close out the call or finish off that subject. So again, please feel free to jump in. Hi, Zach. Thanks for joining. Welcome to the call. So around DR and migration, so we typically talk about HCX or hybrid cloud extension for a mechanism to migrate onto the platform. And as per the call last week, we'll talk about some of the pros and the cons, and then the fact that HCX is not the only migration tool you can use. Certainly not the only tool in the market, and it's definitely not the only tool that VMware make. So there are a couple of reasons you may want to look at other tools as well. So let me start with the numbers, right? So HCX as a tool allows you to perform currently 100 bulk migrations concurrently. So you can put more bulk migrations into your pipe, but they would only do 100 concurrent migrations. The rest will be queued. And we can only protect 500 virtual machines from a DR scenario with HCX. Now, I would imagine most large enterprises in the world have more than 500 virtual machines that they'd like to protect, so they'd be looking at a different technology or product or strategy there. So hence us saying things like HCX isn't the only migration and DR tool out there. So if we do a bit of a comparison, so if we look at SRM, for example, we can do 1,500 machines protected. And we can have 500 per protection group, and we can have 250 per individual recovery plan, and we can have 1,500 concurrent recoveries. So clearly, at least a scale of 3 larger than the HCX from a DR perspective. Now there are sort of plans in place and testing that's happening at the moment to increase the HCX scale. I can't really go into too much detail because they again, it's software, right? And its roadmap, and they're in testing. So going back to, I guess, one of my favorite and earliest points is that scale and supportability is key, right? If you try and go through supported limits, what's the likely outcome of there? Well, it may work, but the likelihood is that even if it does work, if you run into problems, if you hit something, the first thing that support are going to be saying to you is that, oh, you're outside of the supported limits. That's not to say that we won't then investigate and actually test again and say, oh, you're right, it does work and there's a different problem. But the first thing they're going to do is say that actually you're in hot water now because you've gone beyond the supported limits, which is why we post config maximums on a number of different websites. And I often point a link to it. I think I've probably got a hot link to it saved. I'll bring up in a minute as well. So that's kind of a recap on DR and migration. One of the key areas that we often see customers having challenges with VMC on AWS is around automation. Okay, so automation is in speech marks, quotation marks, if you could see my hands, almost consistent with on-prem. Now, are any of you guys, either attendees or panelists, aware of things that don't work off the top of your head the same as they do with on-prem vCenter? Okay.
I guess you couldn't access the host directly.
Absolutely, yep. So you don't have access to root on the host. That's a good point, Zach. So there are a couple of other areas as well that they're not the same. So for example, you don't access. Oh, sorry, not just vCenter, but the full stack. So you don't access the NSX manager the same way. So you have to go through the policy API to perform any NSX operations. So if you've got a bunch of scripts that are using the or API calls that are using the NSX Manager API, they're going to have to be reworked and repointed to the policy API. Anything else anybody's aware of that might sort of come a cropper? I guess one of the new trends in the environment, shall we say, in the virtualization and cloud space has been the use of Terraform. And there is currently a Terraform provider that's literally either just been released or is in early access now. But until then, Terraform did not work. It wasn't supported with VMC. So you couldn't use Terraform providers to do NSXT commands and do provisioning requests for your SDDC, which for a number of our customers, that's kind of the way they work. They do a lot of provisioning activities and obviously don't want those to be manual, so they create everything through Terraform providers. So some good news there is obviously that the Terraform provider for VMC is just kind of being released. Oh, sorry, the NSXT Terraform provider has been released, but it's not quite GA yet. And we talk about NSXT, so everything is for NSXT is literally going to be going down that policy API route anyway. So even though you may have to rework your on-prem stuff to work with the policy API interface instead of the NSXT manager interface, it doesn't matter because in the future that's your only route in anyway. So whether it's now or in 6 months, it's going to be something you have to change to anyway. So what automation solutions are being used on-prem? I guess this is the kind of thing you want to look at first of all, either when you go and see a customer or if you are the customer, do a bit of a review, because obviously if you're a typical vSphere admin, you may not actually know everything that's being used. You may have application owners out there doing with direct access doing certain API calls. So it's a really good idea to do kind of an audit of what's being used from an automation standpoint before you go ahead and decide to go VMC and just throw everything out there. So there are things like there are community-based tools. For example, Fog.io is a stack of scripts and community maintained, and some may work, but again, it's going to be a case of you're going to have to look into those scripts and see if they still work. Can it support multiple vCenter server instances, for example? Can you incorporate REST API calls and do catch-alls, that sort of thing? So when we say it's almost consistent, I'd say, anywhere from 70 to 90% of your on-prem automation should still work, but you're going to have to test it either way. You're going to have to dig into what your API calls are against and what they're doing. So just kind of a heads up, really. So that does detract, sorry, from the kind of the marketing message again of it's exactly the same as on-prem, which by now I'm hoping that everybody realizes it isn't exactly the same. It's pretty close, but because of that management interface we need to maintain, it's not exactly the same. Okay, so there was a quote that a friend of mine, Aidan, found from Arthur C. Clarke saying the only way of finding the limits of the possible is going beyond them. And he kind of rewrote it for a slide I thought was pretty cool, saying the only way of finding the limits of the possible is reading the config maximum document. And that was a direct customer success quote. So we talk about config maximums quite a lot, and it's something that everybody should have bookmarked. And there's some work in process right now to actually link our config maximums with the AWS config maximums. There are certain things I've mentioned a number of times before about, for example, direct connect limits. So stuff like this we're going to embed in our documentation as well. But this is a bookmark page that you should have and check every time you're going to do any kind of deployment. There are a number of things that will catch you out, especially if you've got more than for example, 2 SDDCs. If you've had that limit increased, you're going to have a knock-on effect of hitting other limits, primarily around networking features that AWS present. But it's definitely worth being aware that these numbers may and in fact will change as we roll out sort of new revisions of the platform. So we've got a revision coming out relatively soon, within a month or so, 1.10. And that's going to have, a new version of vSphere in there. There's going to be other features and functionality that we're dropping. So it may well impact the config maximum. So this is not a static site. It's not something that you can look at once, memorize and take away with you like you used to do for the old VCP exams and then go running. So just be aware that some things don't actually marry up as well. So for example, if we look at for example, vCenter maximums. So these are definitely not the same as on-prem. So on-prem, we know that we can have, well, I can't remember what the limit is now. Is it 20,000 VMs? Certainly for a long while it was 10,000 VMs. I think it's 6 dot something increased it to 20,000 VMs. So you can see here the number is a lot lower. And actually the number of VMs per host is a lot lower as well. So that may catch you out when you're doing your sort of environment planning or working out how many hosts, how many clusters, how many in fact, how many SDDCs you need. I know a number of customers that have more than 20, 30,000 VMs. And if they're intending to put even a small portion of them into VMC on AWS, they're going to need a number of SDDCs to host them, right? And there are some other things, for example, that may catch you out. So things like ARP entries per edge node is set at 5,000, right? And the number of VPN tunnels is only 16. So you have to be aware of this when planning. So that's why I keep banging on about going back and sort of checking the config maximums, just like you would for an on-prem design. Just don't make the assumption that it is the same. It'll catch you out every single time. We see this time and time again. So there are some other limits, but I'm not going to go into them right now. But just things to maybe look at. For example, have a quick look at ARP snooping and IP discovery via the VM tools. I think that's down to 1024. Yeah, IP discovery VM tools. So the maximum number of IPs detected by tools is 1024. So very different from on-prem. Okay. I guess the last point I would make about the differences or potential impacts to your technical decision making. There are kind of two primary routes to market to consume VMware Cloud on AWS. There's direct with VMware or via a partner direct to VMware, or there's via AWS and I think it's called the AWS Enterprise Discount Program, or EDP. And if you already have um, an SDDC, you've already deployed an org, and then you decide to go direct to AWS because I don't know, you have a relationship with them as well already, just be aware that there are going to be things that will change. For example, you will have to deploy a new organization if you sign a new contract with AWS. I'm definitely not saying don't go with AWS, because we're partners in this. They provide the hardware and we provide the software on top. So I'm not saying don't go with them. I'm just saying be aware that if you change who you go with, even if you started with AWS and came to VMware, you will require a new organization to host your SDDCs. And as there's no current link between SDDCs and organizations, that's a security boundary, you'll have to do some kind of funky stuff to migrate workloads in and out, basically, if you want to move them between those organizations. Also, currently the AWS EDP is only transacted in US dollars, which is fine for US customers because the orgs must have a US address. But for anywhere else in the world, we have to do some magic in the background, maybe to enable those, or enable you to transact in your own, or at least deploy in your own region, not transact in your own regional currency. And there is a bit of a lack of parity. So AWS cannot currently sell all of our services. So they can sell the VMware Cloud on AWS, they can sell hosts, they can sell stuff, but they cannot currently sell other services. So things like SRM, NSX Advanced Services, and Horizon Cloud as a service is restricted service availability, I think we'll say. So just if you are looking at going AWS to buy all of your stuff from because you're currently an AWS native consumer, just double check what features and functionalities you need before you go down that route, because you may find you'll still actually have to come back to VMware to transact or to buy certain features and functionality anyway. So just to be aware, really. And then so for example, an implication of that would be the managed transit gateway. You'll only be able to buy that, I think, through us initially when we eventually release that. But that will potentially allow SDDC to SDDC communication, but that'll only be within your org. So, for example, if you bought from AWS and VMware, you'll have multiple orgs. So the managed transit gateway will not help you for workload mobility, for example, or communication between those two orgs. So does that make sense? Cool. I take service silence as acceptance. Right. Cool. So that's kind of the end of where I got to with terms of sort of um, the good, the less good, and then the what's coming next kind of stuff. So just as a recap, we talked about storage and networking, operations, logging, migration and DR last week, and then today we just finished off with migration DR, automation, a bit on config maximums, and then a real quick bit about route to market. Now, if there's any questions that any of you guys have, Amy or Gus or Zach online, please feel free to shout now, or again on chat if you're watching on Twitch. We've got a couple of you sitting there watching. Please feel free to ask them. Alternatively, what I'll do is I'll do a bit of a round table really, and I'll ask you guys what you've been up to, and then I'll maybe dig into some stuff I've been looking at this week as well. So we've only got a few people on today. So Zach, last in the alphabet, first in the queue. Just wondering what you've been working on of late. Anything interesting or cool that you've been playing with in the lab or with the customer base you're with? I know Nicola normally joins us, but he's not on today. But
Yeah, he must be busy.
yeah.
See, I had to track down some info on HCX because the customer was trying to they wanted to know if they could do a network extension from VMC. We were talking about this.
Oh yeah.
So I finally found the answer. You have to have NSX on-prem to do a network extension.
Yes.
And you have to configure your HCX installation as a cloud provider.
Right. Okay. So
I
how
don't
does
really
that differ
sure.
then? How does that differ from a normal HCX implementation?
I think it's the licensing. I didn't get the full info on that. I was just chatting with Gabe, but he definitely said you had to have NSX on prem. So probably
Interesting.
most customers don't have that at this point.
So, so I mean, we were looking at it, right? Because I did a number of cloud-to-cloud sort of setups and demos recently using HCX, which is really
Mhm.
simple actually when you look at it, because you kind of you're clicking a thing that says enable HCX, and all the automation goes off in the background, deploys everything for you, which is far simpler than downloading OVAs and doing all the setup on prem. So I kind
Yeah,
of made the assumption that because you can do bi-directional cloud to cloud, one of those endpoints could theoretically be an on-prem version of HCX rather than another cloud version, and it would be pretty straightforward. So it's interesting that it's not quite as straightforward, and
yeah.
you kind of need to have some different, maybe a different licensing model attributed. I'm not even sure how you'd go about sort of getting that enabled. Maybe
Yeah.
next week, if you've found out in the interim, we can dive into that maybe and potentially test it in our lab, and then do a bit of a demo to show what you'd need to change if you're wanting to. Well, actually, before we do that, what was the use case of wanting to do stretching from cloud to on-prem?
I wasn't sure the 100% of the details. I didn't have a chance to meet with them, but they mentioned it was a DR use case, but I didn't delve into that deeply
Interesting.
yet, so I wasn't exactly sure what they were thinking. Because in a DR scenario, your HCX is not going to work. So
Yeah, yeah. And
you're
I'm just also wondering why you couldn't just set it up in the regular manner and then stretch them. I'm just wondering what the implication of stretching from that DR site into the cloud would be, because they'd be up anyway. But I guess it makes a difference where you stretch from, and then where you
yeah,
can then enable things like proximity routing from and stuff like that.
yeah. And if you look in the HCX document, it actually shows the type of pairings that you have, and it mentions it refers to like your on-premise legacy, and then public cloud, and then SDDC.
Yeah,
And
I think we got
it
these
did not,
updated recently. It doesn't do cloud to on-prem, does it?
yeah, it does not show that as a. I think it's under. Yeah, here it is. Cloud to cloud,
Well,
public cloud to
you'd
public
think I've
cloud,
looked at this
SDDC.
a few times, right? If I
Yeah.
and just launch straight into it. So yeah, so we've got legacy vSphere to SDDC, legacy vSphere to public cloud, and then cloud to cloud. So public cloud to public cloud, SDDC, SDDC, or SDDC to public cloud. But yeah, definitely no sort of cloud back onto on-prem,
hmm So
which
I
is
didn't.
interesting. That's a use case that we were talking about a few weeks ago, actually, in the EMEA architects team, about like using swing sites for stuff. So maybe using um, VMC as a temporary migration destination, which I know one of my customers has done. So if they wanted to, um, so they had to exfil a data center, but the next data center wasn't going to be available, but they couldn't reside long term in VMC currently until they updated a lot of process and other documentation. So they were using VMC as a swing site. So they were going to migrate onto VMC, all the workloads, close data center A, open data center B, and then migrate out, which, despite the large egress data charges, was still going to be a cheaper route than doing it to a third physical data center, which is quite an interesting use case, really. And maybe this would then help if we could do cloud back onto on-prem.
Yeah, that's that. Yeah, that's definitely a valid scenario, I guess. If you.
But that kind of goes back to those migration types again as well, though. Depending on the your window for migration, um, we that might not actually be long enough, for example. So we were talking about limitations of numbers. Um, So, for example, layer 2 VPN, you could stretch it and you could migrate that way, but there are limitations there. If you're going to do bulk migrations, all the workloads are offline. Maybe SRM would be a better tool there. Yeah, I guess it really depends, doesn't it, on yeah, but interesting use case. Maybe we could have a chat with the HCX with Gabe and the HCX sort of team about testing that out and adding it as a scenario, like a tested scenario. That'd be an interesting
Yeah, it'd
one to
be
cover.
good. I mean, obviously, if the sticking point's probably NSX, I think yeah, probably even NSXT on
But that's
prem,
fine, right?
just
Because
because it has
NSXT's,
to.
it's the way of the future, right? So
Yeah.
eventually, VMC is not going away, NSXT is not going away. It's going to be the de facto standard. So maybe we can get this. That gives us some time now to sort of test this out and get it listed as a kind of a fourth deployment model. So cloud back onto on-prem, and
Hmm.
and I guess taking out the reluctance to do something that would be seen as, shooting ourselves in the foot by giving the ability to migrate off a cloud. We're still migrating back into vSphere on-prem, so we're still keeping it within the vSphere family. So I actually think that's a pretty valid use case, especially for swing swing site migration capabilities. Cool.
Yep.
Right. Your mission, if you choose to accept it, Zach, is
Yep.
set this up, mate.
Well, I'll be out next week for our kickoff. So
Oh yeah. So is that still going ahead? What with
uh,
the global crisis?
on Tuesday, the week before, haven't got word otherwise. So I would assume, yeah,
Interesting. Well,
we'll
okay.
see.
Yeah, so maybe you'll learn some cool stuff, and then you can bring that back to the call next week as well. And because you'll obviously be meeting all the the product managers there and stuff. That'd be cool.
Hmm.
Um, thanks. Hey Ruth, thanks for joining. We literally just covered off the end of the deck I was running through last week. I haven't been showing the deck, by the way, because it's a bit of an internal one. It does have a few customer names on it, but it also has some non-standard graphics, shall we call them, because it was an internally delivered thing. So not necessarily publicly consumable right now, but maybe I'll post something up on our one of our blog sites, and then we can make it look a bit prettier and better for public consumption. But yeah, so I've just done a bit of a roundtable and just asking people what they've been working on, if they've seen anything interesting, or you guys have any questions that you've come across in the last week or so. So maybe I will, seeing as you're now not on mute, Ruth, I'll ask you. Well done.
Hello, hey guys. No, just one of the main things that I've seen in the last week, and you were on the call as well, Will, was just in relation to VRNI and HCX,
Yes.
and just some of the different ways that customers are using it, both on-prem and to help with migrations to VMC.
Yeah, good shout. I guess do did you have any sort of main takeaways from that call, Ruth, about sort of
Yeah,
some
what was interesting was actually that the customer was using HCX and VRNI just as a migration tool. So VRNI was being used, but NSX wasn't actually used by them on-prem in their data centers. So they were using it essentially just as a way to get to VMC, and not necessarily looking to adopt it on-prem. So I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah, so I think one of their challenges with using that model, which is the same with, I guess, every kind of migration project I've ever seen, suffers from either a lack of or just a too much information. And I know that that particular customer had a bit of an issue where VRNI is almost too good in some areas where it was just giving them so much information they were finding it a little bit hard to trawl through it. So I think one of the takeaways that the BU had was that they were going to look at ways of kind of streamlining the information, maybe for targeted scenarios or to strip out the noise, I guess, in some areas. And for those folks that haven't used VRNI before, so that's VMware Realized Network Insight, and that gives you the ability to basically see what talks to what on your network. So you can point it at your environment, and it will show you all the communication between objects on your network. So for things like, as Ruth was saying, migration planning, it enables you to create your waves or your migration buckets based on network connectivity. So you can migrate, for example, a whole subnet of virtual machines in one go, or you can migrate an application in its entirety in one go, for example. So you minimize the numbers of outages per application. So if you imagine in say a 10 node application, if each of those objects are all sitting on the same subnet and VRNI picks up the communication, it shows all of the objects are the only things that they only talk to together. You can ensure that when you take those 10 objects offline, that's the entirety of that application. You can migrate it over if you're not doing live migration, and then bring it back up in the cloud, and that is that entire application migrated. So it's a really powerful tool. But again, like anything, it takes a bit of getting used to, I suppose, because there's a lot of information there. A lot of good information, but yeah, just quite a lot of information. Anything else from the call at all, Ruth, that you thought was interesting or you took away?
No, I think that was mainly it.
Cool, thank you. Amy, I don't know if you had microphone problems a bit earlier on. I saw you kind of come off mute and go back on mute again. I'm just wondering if there's anything interesting you've seen at one of your customer sites lately, or that any questions that have come up you've been unaware of.
Can you hear me
I
now?
can indeed, yeah.
Okay, great. Now that I can think of, and it's in any kind of issues have been resolved or questions have been answered. So but I can't really, give you guys specifics or
Sure,
at this
yeah,
point.
yeah.
Sure.
It's difficult without sort of almost naming names, really, isn't it? And
Yeah.
I guess a lot of customers are doing very similar things. Migrating onto the platform, loading it up, scaling out, seeing that they're doing stuff. Actually, that's one good point. Actually, that we were talking to a customer about yesterday. A bit of advice that I've just remembered, and I will share the nugget with everybody. So we were talking about migration in this and last week, the stuff I was doing, and there was a bit of useful information that came up that we all know that the platform auto scales, right? So as you fill up, you get to 70% of your storage. You're going to deploy new hosts. So as you're aware, when you deploy a new host, because it's vSAN storage, it's going to rebalance that storage across the host. So we can't add one node, then add another 2 minutes later, and add another 2 minutes later. So if you are planning to deploy or migrate into your environment just for a reduction in compute and storage overhead, it's advisable to pre-deploy your cluster. So when you first deploy, you can deploy those first 4 nodes, and then you can go back in and add more nodes after the fact. And we're looking at those numbers currently as to how many you can actually deploy at any one time, but you have to go back in after the first 4 and add more nodes, and that way your vSAN cluster is set up so that when you first start deploying to it, based on your striping and your failures to tolerate and stuff, it will balance the cluster from the get-go. So you're not allowing autoscaler to try and stay one host ahead of your migration schedule, which would impact your timings, your sort of migration schedules. Anyway, sorry, I went off track there, but I thought I'd share it with you because it was quite it's quite a good piece of advice that some people presume it will just readily grow as you grow, but actually, if you know you're going to grow rapidly, it's better to pre-provision than rely on the system to do it for you.
A lot of my current customers, I'm working at actually pre-deployment.
Yep.
So we're really working through a lot of security questions and networking questions to get ahead of it, the deployment. So that's really what we've been focused on.
Cool. I guess so. I'm imagine some of the questions you've had come around compliance and regulatory stuff.
Yes, absolutely. With one customer in particular. So you're really just trying to get ahead of any blockers that are potentially going to delay deployment.
Yeah. So have you seen kind of the current status of you know, security and other kind of compliance that we've run on the platform, what we comply with or to, and where we are with, you know, like HIPAA and FedRAMP and other stuff.
Yep, I've seen that. So, and that's not necessarily what we've had to address with these customers. But I think every situation is probably pretty unique, depending on what their business is and who their customers are.
Sure. So just on that one, I'm working with kind of UK government stuff at the moment, and we're coming up against a number of things around compliance and regulation. So there are there's a site where we track how we're doing against those regulation bodies and how compliant we are and which we meet, which we're currently testing. I'll try and dig the link out and either post it in the chat in a minute, or I'll put it on YouTube later on so we're aware of it. But we're certainly not, we haven't passed everyone out there, but I know we're working towards a lot. For example, we're working on PCI currently to prove that the platform is PCI compliant. So that's the payment card industry one for people that hold and transact card details. And I know that I think either FedRAMP is in process or it's complete as well, but I'll have to double check on that one.
Yeah, PCI has been one of the outstanding questions. So if that link helps.
Yeah, so we don't have
great.
it currently, but it'll be,
Okay.
if I can dig the link out, it'll be used
Okay.
so you can track it basically, and then you can see when stuff's posted. We had a chat with Narayan last week about some of the regulatory stuff, so it's top of mind for the BU that own the product. So
Great, thanks.
no worries. Cool, Gus, mate. We had a quick chat before we started recording, but I was just wondering if you could share what you've been seeing. You mentioned that you were running some kind of customer panels this week, I believe, over at the mothership in Palo Alto. I think you're stuck on mute, or you've gone to make a cup of tea,
Oh,
which
I apologize.
I don't blame you about. It's a long call.
Oh, I apologize. I was talking on mute. So yeah, we have our advisory board that's currently happening in Palo Alto. It is a minimum of 5-year commitment that our customers make, and they've signed up. It started last year, so we're going on our 2nd year now, which is really great. The customers fly to Palo Alto, and they sit through panels with different product management. All of the product management teams provide feedback on the service, the things they've experienced. Last year, Claire was here with one of her customers, which I thought was really great, to have somebody over from the UK.
Yep.
But it's just really great to get that feedback directly from the customer, unbiased. This is what we're looking to do, to brainstorm. And the really neat thing, it was similar to VMworld, where different customers with different use cases started kind of co-collaborating and kind of building this community and talking about, well, oh, you're trying to do this, well, we did that, but we opted to use this service versus that one, or to try this bit with HCX. So it was really cool to get them kind of talking to one another. And now it's led to this little micro community. They kind of have a WhatsApp group between them that they all the engineers and the different security folks within that company kind of chat with each other to talk about kind of potholes and things to avoid and what they're kind of doing. So it's growing and growing to build this great VMware community of our customers.
That's pretty cool, actually. We had so VMworld last year. I don't know how it was in the US, but certainly in the Europe VMworld, we had a VMware Cloud on AWS kind of summit, and we had some of the big European customers get together in a room, and again they met the PMs and it was very sort of behind closed doors, but so everyone could freely speak and share very similar vein to what you're saying. And actually off the back of that, they've spawned a number of kind of community working groups, and there's one in the UK. We have kind of 3 or 4 of the biggest customers currently are based in the north of England, in the UK, and they formed this what they call the Northern Community of Practice, or NCOP, where they meet, regularly. They share tips and tricks. They talk about what they're planning to do. It's totally organized by themselves. It's VMware are involved at the sidelines and only basically as if you look at the RACI model, we're the informed bit. We're not organizing or arranging anything. So yeah, it's very community led and driven, and it's paying dividends for them already. I think they're working together, and yeah, it's looking pretty cool. So for guys, I guess anybody catching the recording, if you're interested in either setting up or joining existing communities of practice that may or may not be happening in your area, similar to kind of, but very informally, but similar to the kind of the VMUG style things, but very targeted around VMware Cloud on AWS, and just literally customers talking to customers. So if you're interested in setting one of those up, feel free to reach out to either myself or any of the other customer success team that you have online now or that you work with, and we can reach out to each other and put you in contact with them. But yeah, that sounds pretty cool, Gus. Actually, that they're getting together and sort of co-designing almost. It also gives them power of voice as well. They can immediately, as a group, feedback that something isn't right. That something doesn't work the way they need it to work, or it gives them extra weight when providing, feature and functionality requests rather than coming in individually. They have one large voice, so that's pretty cool as well.
Hmm. I agree. Oh, and I think a shameless plug that we need to do when we're talking about community is, if you're a customer listening in, to be able to already start having conversations with your leadership team about either attending VMworld Europe or VMworld US. The sooner you kind of talk about it, the sooner you can try to get funding.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we can, I'm guessing that certainly from the Europe one that we did with the VMC day, Ruth, you were there as well. I think you'll agree that everybody not only found it really useful, but it's still paying dividends now, well after the fact. The relationships they've made either with individuals from the BU or from the tech marketing teams, or even with other customers on the day.
Definitely, and even things like suggestions for future product releases, things like that. I think people got direct feedback, which was great.
Yes, yeah.
Hmm.
It's kind of very different submitting something on a web page and hoping somebody in a product management team reads it, to having them face to face explaining not only why you want, what feature would be cool, but exactly why you want it and what the impact to you would be if you don't have that feature. The worst impact being you can't use the service, obviously, um, but yeah, I mean, it's getting FaceTime with people that are, especially for the non-US based lot, is often difficult because a lot of our product management team are based in the US. So for a customer based in EMEA to be able to sit in front of a general manager of a cloud group within VMware and list what their challenges are and get direct promises to help and direct feedback is, I think, is pretty cool.
Just to add as well, I think it's important to realize that VMware is moving from a brick and mortar sort of solutions-based company. One of the great things about VMC that I've seen over the years since I started with the service when it was in its infancy is that product management, our leadership, we want to help you as our customer. Give us your challenge, give us your burden, and let us come up with creative solutions to kind of get you over that hurdle and kind of make VMC work for you. And our product management team, I mean, they love pet projects. I mean, if something's not possible, they're going to be honest. But if it's something that piques interest that I think is really exciting, they'll go behind it, and it will help kind of restructure the way that we have our roadmap. So it's very valuable input to be able to go and just kind of chat. And at the end of the day, it's like chatting with a buddy over a beer and just talking technology with it. I think it really is amazing.
Yeah, no, I'd second that. I guess what's different about VMC with it being the SaaS-based service is that it's not this monolithic thing anymore, like that requires, a 5-year lifespan to be good, and then you get a major upgrade. As you've seen from previous calls, we're dropping software hot fixes, patches, stuff out all the time, and your platform's being upgraded, and you get major upgrade every quarter. So you're getting the latest and greatest all the time, which a cadence like that means that we have the ability to, if there's a major request from from a number of players, or even just one player, a major request comes in. For example, the NSXT Terraform provider came from one customer, and this one customer said, this is how we operate, and we cannot operate without this. And a lot of sort of co-development has gone into it, and it's now released and will be GA very shortly. So again, software, so there may be teething problems or a bit of trial and error getting something new like that to work, but hey, it's out there faster than it would have been on-prem. So there's no sort of doubting the speed of pace that the platform can run at and be adapted to. So if you have challenges, if you have feature requests, reach out to your customer success, I'm going to call out your VMware Cloud provider partner program people like Harold, who's just joined. Hello, Harold, and feed that back, and we'll absolutely take it in. But if you want to join one of these community practices, again, reach out to us and we'll see if we can align you to somebody or a group of people that's close to you geographically, and we'll help out where we can. So for those, so Lisa's just joined. Hi Lisa, hi Harold. So a couple just joined. We're kind of tail end of the call right now, but we're just doing a bit of a roundtable. I'm just asking people to call out if they've seen anything in the last week or so, anything cool, anything they've been working on that's new, any new kind of use cases, anything like that. So don't feel bad if you haven't, but Harold, you get to work with some of our biggest partners. So I'm guessing you'll have seen some very innovative uses and stuff that happens on our VMC on AWS platform. So if you want to come off mute, if you've seen anything you want to share, if not, we can bring it up next call. That's not a problem. But hey, nice to have you on the call either way.
Hey, how's it going, Will?
Good man.
Good. Yeah, so I mean, it might not be super innovative, but recently we had a partner that's doing a migration, and they have a specific use case, and I'm not sure if you guys covered it here, but they need to actually extend layer 2, not just from on-prem to one SDDC, but to a second. So that's something that will support it. So say they had VLAN 100 on premises.
Yep.
They need to, for a DR as well as a migration use case that they're running simultaneously, they need to be able to extend that layer 2 network to both clouds, to SDC in US East as well as one in Ohio.
So they did source to 2 SDDCs rather than doing source to 1 and then the SDDC over cloud to cloud to another. So they did it 1 to many.
Yes, 1 to many with the extension feature.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I've not seen that before.
Yeah, and it was, I think initially in early days, it was something that wasn't supported, but over the last couple of weeks, I think maybe the BU started supporting it maybe about a month or within the last month and a half or so.
Harold, your timing as ever is impeccable. So not only have we talked about DR on this call today, and we've talked about a use case that we're going to try and get in, which is cloud back to on-prem layer 2 stretching. So that's another interesting use case. But we've also just been talking about the HCX deployment types as well. So we're on that website, as you can see now. So that's interesting. The one to many's something I've not come across before. So yeah, cool. Thanks for sharing.
Yep.
And Lisa, I know you've always got many things to say.
Yeah, I think I owe you like 3 questions. I've committed to them. I owe you 4 now next time.
Not a worry. But listen, if you don't have any questions, that's absolutely fine, Lisa. You did sort of drop in at the end, and I did drop you in it. So yeah, not to worry. Well, listen,
sorry for being late.
One more real quick. I'll mention one more real quick.
Oh,
if
yeah,
you don't
please
care.
do. Yeah.
With the same customer, with the same partner, rather, they needed to be able to use HCX, the layer 2 extension from HCX with SRM. And that's something that's also supported by the BU. I know it might sound not that exciting, but the partner had that same use case where they needed to be able, because of that, being able to extend the L2 between 2 sites.
Sure.
Instead of using the standard edge or standalone edge for L2 VPN.
Yep.
We had to discuss with both the DR BU as well as the HCX BU about being able to use HCX with SRM. for L2 extension, so that and this is there's that case where the HCX BU was integrating SRM with HCX.
Yes.
This isn't that. This is using the HCX advanced features that come with VMC and using that L2 extension for layer 2 for site recovery as a supported use case. So that was something else that wasn't like, I think actually the BU, the DRAS BU wants to go over some documenting of that particular feature to make sure that people understand how it works. But that is another kind of deployment method that's they're starting to support as well.
Oh, that's pretty cool. And that, you know what that sounds like as well, Harold? That sounds like a future demo that you're going to run for us. That sounds amazing. Well done for volunteering. No, it's pretty cool actually. So it's interesting that it wasn't part of the original sort of SRM and HCX DR as a service kind of stuff. So this is, I mean, this is key as well, right? So this is yet again customers coming up with different ways of using the products, not a supported model, but because of close interaction and speed of platform deployment and the capabilities we have, because it's this SaaS service, we can get these features tested, supported, and available at a much faster cadence than we could ever do with sort of on-prem versions of the software. So yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Harold. Two really good examples there. So yeah, we're kind of approaching the top of the hour, as you Americans like to call it. So if there are no questions coming on chat, there's nothing else on Twitch either. I will give you kind of 8 to 9 minutes of your day back. Thank you everybody for joining. Another good chat today. Let's see if we can get something coming into some questions coming in for next week's call, and then we can dive into or have a demo on something that people want to see. So thank you everybody for joining, and I'll speak to you all next week.
Well,
Thanks, Will.
Thanks, Will.
Talk to you later, Will.
Cheers.
Thanks, Will.